I will now call to Gerald Knaus, who is the President of the European Stability Initiative, before giving the floor to Franz Timmermans. Well, what are the lessons learned from the initiative from Southeastern Europe, also towards the process in the Middle East? Perhaps you can develop a bit on that. Thank you. Please.
Sure.
First of all, thanks a lot for the opportunity to speak here. I represent a think tank that is based in Berlin, but has also been working a lot on the Balkans and Turkey. I've been in Turkey since 2004, and what I thought, looking at the program of this event, might be most useful is to do what you propose in the brochure, to take some of the abstract ideas from yesterday, EU soft power, and apply them to that region that we are discussing now, with my particular experience of what has been happening in Turkey. To take two ideas which I think are relevant to EU foreign policy in the Middle East, in North Africa, and in Turkey. The first one is one that is at the moment hotly contested in Europe, which is the relationship between freedom of movement of people and security, an area that is at the heart of current negotiations between Turkey and the EU, and that is also obviously a big issue in the Mediterranean. You know, fears, this is one of the easiest issues to be a populist about, fears of mass migration, the tragedies of boats trying to cross the Mediterranean, the impression of a fortress Europe, the relationship between freedom of movement of people and security. Now, in this area, Europe has, of course, been exemplary in one field in the last 20 years, by European ministers of interior innovating and developing a new understanding how security and freedom of movement can actually be combined. It wasn't just Schengen, which has abolished 16,500 kilometers of land borders, while at the same time dramatically increasing cooperation between ministers of interior in Europe and not actually losing control, contrary to what Le Pen or sometimes Mr. Sarkozy have been saying in France. It was also the idea that a sphere of freedom of movement can be expanded to the east, to great gain for everybody, so that today, of course, we have no border between Germany and Poland. It was the idea that you can use this as a tool to promote reforms in the Balkans, which was done in the last few years. Balkan countries to carry out reforms in return for visa-free travel. It was at the center of relations today with the EU and Moldova. Now, if you've been in Moldova recently, one of the most interesting debates was on the law on non-discrimination. You know, when Moldovans had a big debate, as the Moldovan church said, we cannot allow non-discrimination when it comes to sexual minorities. And the EU said, well, look, you need to pass a law on non-discrimination, or otherwise we can't give you visa-free travel. And it is at the moment at the center of debates between Turkey and the EU. Just yesterday, the European Council has actually agreed for the first time on the Commission starting a process, a visa dialogue, with the goal of visa liberalization here in Brussels yesterday. Now, why is this so important for EU and the Middle East? Because it shows that despite the populist challenges to Schengen, to freedom of movement, to visa liberalization for the Balkans, European leaders and interior ministers have, for the last 15 years, been able to make the alternative case by saying that if we want to be secure in Europe, we need to have partners in our neighborhood. That if we want to be capable of stopping illegal migration, we can't build walls and fences, as the US has been doing in Mexico on the border. We need to actually have partners that we can work with on the other side of the border. Now, this philosophy should now be expanded. And of course, this is the big debate with Turkey. But Turkey is not only interesting as a model that it can help the EU deal with illegal migration and then get visa-free travel at the end of the process. Turkey is itself, through its visa policy, expanding this idea. And this is extremely important for the Middle East. If you live in Istanbul, you cannot help but notice how in the last 5 years, the number of travelers from Tunisia, young people from North Africa, of course, there were 700 Syrians. There were a million Iranians last year. They were actually traveling into Turkey. That this is one of the most effective ways of soft power spreading. And I think this is something where the EU again needs to look for inspiration as it looks to the Middle East. The second point, a very simple one. The EU has had a very consistent policy in the last 10 years on the role of generals in politics in Turkey. Now, I agree with almost everything that has been said before. But let's not forget, Turkish generals had created a system where for 50 years, as one scholar called it, they were not governing, but they were ruling. Through National Security Council, through control on the budget. Every 10 years there was an intervention. The EU has been consistent in the last 15 years saying this is not acceptable. And this has actually, in the end, brought a situation where today, for the first time, generals in Turkey are no longer in control. Now, let's support progressive forces, but let's hope that they come to power through elections. And I think here is another lesson that is important for the Middle East. And this, of course, is also not something the EU has done, even with Turkey, for much of the last few decades.